If you don't want to appear in this recording, you should please turn off your video. All participants will be muted during the talk, other than the speakers. For an optimal experience of the talk, we recommend that you switch to speaker view in your Zoom settings. For the question and answer time that will follow the talk, we ask that you write using the chat Zoom function that you would like to ask a question. We will monitor the chat area and, when it's your turn, ask you to unmute so that you can ask your question. Alternately, you can type your question directly into the chat and we'll read it out for you. I am delighted to introduce our speakers for today, Deblekha Guin and Sharyn Carroll. Deblekha Guin is the founding director of the Access to Media Education Society, AIMS, an organization that supports directly impacted youth in making and sharing meaningful media. She was awarded the Intercultural Trust Award at last year's BC Anti-Racism Awards in recognition of years of service in the JEDI realms, JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusivity. When she isn't working to keep AIMS afloat, she can be found splashing about in the ocean, dabbling in various art forms, or trying to touch her toes. She's a grateful mother, daughter, neighbor, and friend. She has lived on Galiano Island since 1994. Sharyn Carroll spent 3 years working on sexual assault response for the Southern Islands and is now the new sexual assault response coordinator for Islanders working against violence. She is also a founder of the Salt Spring-based BIPOC Community Collective, which is working with School District 64 to dismantle racism for youth, teachers, and staff alike. She is a mother, a feminist, an educator, a trained midwife, and a community organizer who strongly believes in the power of community. A Galiano resident for many years, she now lives on Salt Spring Island. I'll turn it over to Deblekha and Sharyn. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much, Kate, and all the folks that have been organizing in the background. I'm just going to start saying quite honestly that okay, there we go. And everyone can hear us okay, by the way? Okay. Yes, okay. So yeah, I at first when Kate approached me, I was very flattered to do something around International Women's Day. I was flattered, but I was quite reluctant. Part of that is about my own imposter complex, which will, imposter syndrome, which will come up later as well. But part of it is that for me, these issues around intersectional feminism are mostly only meaningful in context, in action, and most come to life in conversation. So I had the brainwave, and also to have a support so that I wasn't doing this alone. I was like, hey, Sharyn and I have been working alongside each other in the district and reconnecting, and we knew each other a while ago. And I thought I would really might be more interesting and engaging for us to be in conversation. So I called her up and popped the idea, and she accepted willingly. So I am super, super grateful that you accepted the mission to be in conversation, recorded conversation.
Thank you. And I was really flattered that you asked, and was a little afraid that I might not be able to live up to the challenge, but it's been a fun experience, and I must say I'm very delighted to be following Evelyn White. After her last talk, I was there live, but I did watch the recording of it, and I feel like Evelyn's backup singer, and I'm and the things that she said were so powerful and just really propelled me into really wanting to take this on and do this with you. So with that, during the conversation, for those of you out there in Zoom land, there may be some moments of uncomfortability, and I am going to invite you all to use that uncomfortableness that has landed anywhere in your body as a measurement and a guide to dismantle your own racism or your own internalized racism, to use that as a means for change for all of our communities, because really change does not happen without things getting uncomfortable first.
Yeah, so if you feel it in your body, maybe even take note of where it is, because that's a great sign that there's potentially work to be done, and get curious about it. So thank you for
Can
that.
I just also add, if you have a journal or a pen or a piece of paper, because we are going to be putting some prompts on the screen and asking you to do some reflection. So please go grab some writing material, because we're going to leave you all with some homework.
Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to start it off here. We're just going to, with just like, I guess, tell me a little bit about your journey, and just about who you are in the world and your journey in terms of how you ended up in this particular fishbowl.
So I am an immigrant. I came to Canada as a child. I remember walking, I guess it was March, and I remember walking out of the airport, and it was one of the coldest, snowiest March on record, and walking out of the airport and turning around and walking right back in and just crying because I could not believe how cold it was. And I grew up in Toronto. Well, when I first got to Canada, we lived briefly inside Toronto, but then moved to Bramalea, a town that doesn't exist anymore because it's been incorporated into the GTA, where I spent most of my primary years living in a rural community, you know, very much like the Gulf Islands. At the time, we didn't lock our door. We always knew who our neighbors were. But there was a lot of racism. In my primary school, I think we were the only Black family. In my middle school, we were one of 3 Black families, and there was a couple of East Indian families, a couple of Asian families, but that was it. And then in my adolescent years, we moved to Etobicoke, where we both actually lived, not too far from each other, but not necessarily at the same time. And then I went to the school where it was predominantly Black, and I just didn't know how to navigate that either, after having lived in a rural setting where I was one of few, and really all I wanted to do was just fit into the wallpaper, right? And it still is what I want to do, living on the Gulf Islands. So I went to university, took women's studies, and eventually made my way out to the coast. And I remember being on the ferry going from Vancouver to Victoria for the first time, and looking out the window and seeing these gorgeous islands and just thinking, oh, Toronto Islands, that's where I want to live. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know when I'm going to get there, but I'm going to live on those islands one day. And I eventually made it to Galiano. And after my child was born, I realized I needed a bigger community. So when she was 2, we moved to Salt Spring. And what about you? How did you come to be here?
Yeah, all the zigzag path of all of us getting here. Well, just a little bit about me first. I will say that I was conceived in Calcutta, but born in Toronto, to Shubir and Carol Guin, who were rebels in their own cultural context, being in a mixed marriage in the very early 60s, born in India, and had my brother while they were in India, and they emigrated to Canada just before I was born. I'm sort of looking at my mom, who's over here. And I would say that as a kind of a person who's mixed race, mixed class, and who was also, much like Sharyn, done a lot of this flip-flop back and forth between the city and the country. It seemed like I was constantly sort of in the in-between zone, and a little bit working as a cultural translator or bridge builder, or sometimes reluctantly, but that was sort of what I took on as my lot. And I spent the first 8 years in very multicultural Rexdale, Etobicoke, before moving to the outskirts of a town that had a population of 1,000 in Six Nations Mohawk territory. and that was decidedly, I wanted to say decidedly unmulticultural, but obviously it was Mohawk territory. It was, it's just that it was such a segregated, I'm very embarrassed to say, very little, probably only just before I left, there was very little interaction between the Native and the non-Native community. Anyway, I graduated there in this small town, like, you know, couldn't leave it fast enough, much like my, you know, the idea of get out of this one horse town. I went to the city to study, bounced around a bunch of different majors, landed on women's studies. No surprise, we share that in common, women's studies and cultural studies. And then I moved out west to go to grad school, to Vancouver to go to grad school. And I guess about a year into grad school, I became super disillusioned and quite unbalanced. That's what years of feeding only your head will do to you. And ended up having a pretty severe physical breakdown at the age of 26. And that spurred my decision to take a semester off and go to this island that I heard this guy I met at an art opening talking about. He said he was editing a film at on this island. And so I tracked him down and said, I'm just gonna take a semester off. I'm gonna come and live in this island. And that was 27 years ago. And I will just say, unlike you, who didn't, like, you visioned it and it happened. People were like, you on the Gulf Islands, you're not really Gulf Islands material. I was just trying to get away from something. I didn't know what I was going to. So to my shocking surprise, it healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. Like I fell so hard in love with Galiano. And especially after coming, it felt like, for me, when I think back at that time, it was like leaving the black and white at that time soulless world of academia. For me, it just was not feeding me. And I felt I came into a juicy technicolor world. I was fed by the natural community and the natural surroundings, but also the community. Had so much respect for the different, in the linearity that I was in, focus, like critique, to be in a place where people lived, creative ways, this creative off-roading. Yeah. Anyway, and I love the intergenerational mixing. So anyway, that is how the best non-decision I ever made brought me to Galiano. So,
it is.
I did one thing I do want to say. I know I have to just wrap it up, but I do want to say arriving here as an uninvited guest to the unsurrendered territories of the Penelakut and other Hulkaminam speaking people, I still live in this really, I don't know how to reconcile the fact that this place kind of saved me in so many ways, but how to reconcile with the fact that just my being here means I'm part of the ongoing occupation, which means that other people who could be healed and saved by this place are not necessarily having access to this land. So one of many contradictions. So I wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you. That's an important acknowledgement to make, right? I mean, we are living in a racist culture, and really we are displacing the first peoples of this land, which, really belongs in this conversation, but I'm not Indigenous to this land, and neither are you. We are just settlers who are displacing people who belong here. But I wanted to ask you, when was the first time that you really became conscious of the fact that you are a feminist?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually in some ways kind of hard. In some ways, I think I've probably always been a feminist. And I will largely grant my mom, I will give her a lot of credit for that. My mother might appear at first blush to be a little meek, but she was very determined to raise us in a pretty democratic household. And sort of like as soon as I was able to make an argument, I had an equal vote. So very, very motivational in terms of negotiation skills. And also, I guess, I didn't read a lot, and this is a library presentation, but I didn't really read a lot of books as a kid, but I read people. And I was always fascinated by power differentials and who got power and who didn't and why. Mm-hmm. And of course, gender being a huge part of that class was also super huge as a mixed class with, that whole thing about families. But and in terms of gender was really obvious for me because my brother was super, super smart. And every teacher was super disappointed by that. They were like, how can you be related to your brother? He's so smart. And like, on the one hand, I did internalize that notion that as a girl, I wasn't as smart as he was, but there was even a little nub in there, even as a kid, where I knew that part of the problem was that they just didn't have the capacity to notice and appreciate different forms of intelligence. Mm-hmm. So I think I had the little seeds of a self-advocate in there somewhere. But probably by grade 11, I was a pretty outspoken feminist, just calling out double standards in dating worlds, how people navigated in the community, and the advertising. At that point, it's kind of ironic where I ended up, because I was definitely interested in just the way people were represented in the media. So, how about you and feminism?
Well, my story is a little bit opposite of yours. As an immigrant coming to the country, my little step-grandson there, he's so sweet, has the best questions all the time. And he asked me the other day, what was it like growing up as an immigrant? And, the only thing that I could tell him was that I was so focused on finding ways to fit in that I didn't really pay attention to things like the academics or anything else that was going on, the politics of the land and all of that. And when we came to the country, it was my brother and I who came to find yet another little brother in the house. And I came from a very rural setting in Jamaica, and I had the thickest accent. And so we would go out and people would not be able to understand me. And I spent so much time working on speaking this way because I wanted to fit in, that even until this day, I'm the only one in my family who speaks this way. Everyone else has a Jamaican accent. I don't, because I wanted to be part of the woodwork. But my mother is a very, very strong woman. She raised 4 teenagers by herself as a single mom, worked, made sure there was food in the fridge, shoes on our feet, really taught us, and because we are from this traditional kind of culture, really taught us to, our manners and how to mind our P's and Q's. And I remember the exact day I was in the kitchen with my brothers and my sister, and my mother called us all into the kitchen and told us, because she is a product of her own environment, which there is a lot of sexism. Even though this woman was so strong, she was a victim to this cultural sexism that existed in our culture. And she told my sister and I, now, I'm going to teach you girls how to cook, so you know how to cook for your husbands. And I'm going to teach you boys how to cook, so just in case your wives don't know how to cook. And in my head, because, as an immigrant with an immigrant family, you don't disrespect your elders, right? And in my head, I went, fuck you, no way, this is unfair. And I remember arguing with my mother of like, wait a minute, what if I never want to get married? What if I'm gay? What if I'm bisexual? Why do I have to learn how to cook to take care of a man? Like, what is wrong with this picture, Mom? Can we have this conversation? And eventually she kind of gave up of arguing with me and just went, okay, I'm just teaching you how to cook because you're a human. But I just couldn't let it go of just like, okay, the sexism thing is really driving me crazy. And from that moment on, I really found my feminist tongue, so much to the point that my brothers refused to let me meet their girlfriends at the time because I was going to fill their head with my feminist BS. Hey bros, how's it going? And I'm so glad that my youngest brother, who was very adamant about just like, and very pushing back against my feminist viewpoint, now has 3 girls that he's got to raise. Anyway, so that was the moment for me of just like, this world is not a fair place. It's not an equitable place, but it needs to be. And I knew then that if we were going to survive as beings in this planet, we needed to make this world a more equitable place for everybody.
Cool.
Yes.
Thank you. So, yeah, I hope your brothers. Anyway, we'll get the prologue will be the family conversations afterwards.
Exactly.
So many things I want to respond to, but I know we don't have a lot of time. So, yeah, so we've shared a lot of stories over the last. We have way more stories than could possibly fit in this. But just about even though we absolutely love the places that we live in, part of how I show respect, unlike obedience, I was never very good at obedience, but part of how I show respect is questioning. And so, you know, some of the critique of Island Fishbowl is out of love. But part of the stories we've been talking about is what how we've navigated our realities as feminists of colors in rural environments. Because a lot of what we see in the media, you look at what's happening about even sexism and racism, and it tends to be very urban, and a lot of it tends to be American. But what about yeah, what are the unique textures of being in a rural environment and being an intersectional feminist?
Well, you know, I've been living on Salt Spring for 20 years this year. And I guess I came to the Gulf Islands probably about 24 years ago now. And I went to university in a very rural town. And so there's an attraction for me for living in a place that is green. There's fresh air around me. There's not sidewalks, which I don't think is a bad thing. People know each other. But I remember going into work one morning, and it was Halloween. And one of my coworkers was dressed from head to toe in blackface, had on a little kind of rag and a bone through his nose. And I just remember walking down the hallway of where I worked, and my mouth just fell open. And, you know, there's my internalized racism as well. That was just like, holy shit, look at the amount. I'm sorry, I am going to swear a little bit here today, but look at the amount of work and detail that he put into this costume. Like, it was not just his face, it was his arms, his legs, and his hands. So someone came around and took a picture of him and put it on the website for my workplace. And I went on the website. I just happened to go on the website to find something that I needed as a worker. And there and behold, again, there he was staring me down. And so I called my bosses to complain, but it took days for it to come down. And there was never an apology. There was never any sort of acknowledgement about the fact that not only was this acceptable in a work environment, hey, let's put it out there to the world because look at what a great costume and the amount of time that he took preparing it. You know, and that's just one of the examples. And I really want to tell a story about another thing that happened to me. So after the first Michael Brown killing there in the States and the Black Lives Matter movement started, I had put up on my Facebook, which at the time I was very kind of apolitical, because I feel like in a small town, because of the shade of my skin, I stick out like a sore thumb. I don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. I really just want to be one of everybody else. And so there was a Kende Wiley painting. Kate, would you mind putting the painting up on the screen? So someone had taken this Kende Wiley painting, amazing artist, and taken this photo and put underneath it Black Lives Matter. And I love art. And so I fell in love with the art and I shared it on my Facebook group. One of my quote unquote friends then wrote in, how dare I share? I didn't write anything about the picture. I didn't write how I felt about it. I just put the picture up. But one of my male friends then chimed in and said, how dare I put this on my Facebook? How dare I complain? Because basically the community in which I live has accepted me and my daughter, have taken us in, have supported us. And he was a Black Irish, and he'd faced just as much, even more racist experiences than I have. And so why was I making a fuss on my page? And at the moment, because I don't really want to stick out, I just felt triggered and I didn't know what to do. And so I tried to call him in a little bit, and some of my friends jumped in there and defended me. They didn't ask for consent, but at the time I was really glad that they just did that. And so this man then went on to send me private messages and ask me out on a date for lunch to discuss why he had responded in the way he did. And I was just taken aback, and I'm just like, are you really asking me out on a date right now? Should I be grateful for that as well? Should my daughter be grateful that at least, white men who can put me in my place in the community that I choose to live in are also gracious enough to want to date my angry Black angst in this community? And so I've experienced lots of overt racism and lots of covert racism living in the Gulf Islands. But, this is my community and I choose to live here for a reason. But these stories, as they're happening to me, how do I communicate them to my community to get them to understand that none of us are removed from being racist just because we live in a small, progressive community? What about you?
Yeah, well, I definitely, for sure. And I resonate with a lot of the stuff you said about gratitude. It'll come up in the second story I share, but it's funny. I think about, in my hyper judgmental feminist, undergrad days, I was quite harsh critic of my dad, and like, Dad, why didn't you call the racist things you experienced? Why wouldn't you call them racism? And it was that model minority, I can't critique this place that accepted me because that would show ingratitude. Mm-hmm. And I used to be kind of harshly judgmental of him, but I'm realizing that same thing kind of happens to me around Galiano. So I'll kind of a little bit, I guess one story from, I think in us telling stories, I'm seeing patterns of survival strategies and in rural environments, and it seems like assimilate and overcompensate are two big ones that I leaned on then and are still alive to this day. But like in telling stories, I was remembered when I was 14, a mall rat, and we were going to get ready to go to the Brantford Mall, and somehow someone made it clear that I was going to lower the status of the group and our possibilities to interact with other Brantford boys because of my dark skin, and that we needed to find a way to explain it away. And it was cool to be Italian, but not cool to be South Asian. So I can't even remember. I mean, that's the thing about when you bury stuff. I can't even remember. I'm sure I was hurt, but I responded by really getting into, let's plot it. I even got myself a name. I was Deblekha Guin, and I even threw in that I was going to, I've actually just come back from a vacation from Florida that would give me a bit of a class bump. And, and that's why my skin was dark. And I mean, I got really into my backstory, although, they kind of let me know also that I was going to be background, and I didn't really need my backstory, didn't need to be that prominent, but you know, I was a total co-conspirator. But in terms of, you know, and now, yes, assimilate and overcompensate still, you know, try to get them to like me, and try to get folks to like me, and try to get folks to need me, to be ever useful, so that, you know, I wouldn't get shut out. And that really, and so that was one thing there, but that, in a way, when I was a kid, you know, it wasn't my community of choice. Like, I made the best of it. It was great, but I didn't ever choose to live there. Galiano was a different thing. Even though I kind of came here by mistake, I was, as I said, like, you know, madly in love with the place. And I think I'd probably lived here. I think I probably lived here a couple of years, and I was, there was a community talent night, which is like, you know, one of those moments of amazing island pride. Just like, I will say, International Women's Day just recently made me want to renew my vows to Galiano all over again. Like those moments where you're just like, this really is the most amazing place. So we were at a communities talent show, intergenerational mix. You know, it's a chance for people to be their wacky selves and for everyone to celebrate it. And I'm in the back of the hall, and just happy as can be. And four of the main pillars of the community, there was a skit making fun of South Asian salal pickers. And I just remember, like, just going cold, going hot, you know, ringing white noise in my ears, like not wanting to see it, not wanting to hear it, not wanting to deal with it, because I knew the stakes. And I didn't actually, you know, I didn't say anything for a long time, because I also wanted to be careful, because I loved the people even that were involved in the skit. And I wasn't quite sure how to articulate it. And I, you know, had small conversations with folks. But I mean, this, you know, I was devastated by the skit, but nothing like how devastated I was by my response, the response I got to my response to the skit. A lot of the same things. It was like, well, first of all, there was no racism until you got here. It was like, okay, no racism until you got here. But we accepted you. And if you don't like it, you should leave. So it was sort of like, I was so beautifully, lovingly welcomed into the community. Melinda was a big part of my guide, introducing me to people. And I was grateful for being so lovingly embraced. But it was that notion that the island was still run by invisible gatekeepers who could, like, get rid of me in a second. And it was just like, you know what, I broke I broke a trust by even daring to name it. Also, you know, your classic stuff, you know, some of the spiritual bypassing kind of stuff, like, you know, I think you're just a little bit too sensitive and a bit too tense. Like, it was just a joke. That's part of it's part of our island culture, is like, we're all about humor. Apparently you don't have any humor. And it's like, I really think I do have. You know, it was, you know, it was, what were some of the other, if she doesn't like it, leave, too sensitive. There was one other, oh yeah, the other one that kind of actually hurt the most was, and it was said with love, but we don't think of you like that. You're not one of them. And it was like, oh God, so you mean I'm such a good assimilator that you never thought of me as potentially being insulted by, and also because maybe I'm more
and they probably didn't see color.
Probably didn't see color. So anyway, it was just and of course 25 years later, I'm still here, didn't get kicked out, didn't lose my but it did affect something. Like I think probably from that day forward, I really made a conscious but really an unconscious decision to not share the work I do in this area and in this community. We made it through, and I'm grateful that we made it through, and lots of courageous conversations were had. But what it really struck me is like how quickly that other stuff came up. And it just reminds me that even though there's so much, you know, a lot of people really believing that this is such a woke community is like, we're really woke until anything threatens it. And then we see what's really going on. And some of our older conditioning comes right to the surface. And, you know, and I see it particularly with sexism. I mean, too, on this island. I mean, it's on the one hand, this island is populated with so many unbelievably powerful women. Like, it is kind of amazing. It's a big part of why I want to live here. But there's still so much internalized misogyny that is held not just by it's held by the women as well here. So I just think, we need to be honest about it. And on that note,
I am going to give you guys all some homework to do. So at this point, what I would like you to do, Kate, maybe you can put up that Robin DiAngelo quote. Robin DiAngelo has written a book called White Fragility, and what we're going to do is put up this quote, and I'm going to read it, and I would like you to just take a moment to reflect on what it says and ask yourself some questions. So white progressives can be the most difficult for people of color because to the degree that we think we have arrived, we will put our energy into making sure that others see us as having arrived. None of our energy will go into what we need to be doing for the rest of our lives, engaging in ongoing self-awareness, continuing education, relationship building, and actual anti-racist practice. So I just want you to take a moment, let that land, and I want you to ask yourself, do you see yourself in this quote? Can you think of a time in the recent past that you've put more energy into virtue signaling or image management than you did into sitting in the discomfort and critical reflecting? So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to just look at that quote, and we're going to come back. And if some of you would like to share your responses in the chat, we're going to give you an opportunity to do that.
and I'm just going to say again, no obligation to share, but just note it and hopefully come back to it. Just let yourself go and try not to censor yourself.
So we're going to be back at about 3:45. So 5 minutes.
we forgot to unmute ourselves.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I got a private audience with Sharyn and you didn't get it.
So before we go into the sharing, what I wanted to say, I just wanted to say something about Robin DiAngelo. I read her book, White Fragility, about 2 years ago, and I remember laying in bed and reading the book and feeling like, oh my God, this is how I have felt my whole life. And here is this woman putting it out there in a way that I know that people who are going to read this book will understand differently than when I say it. And this is going to go into the other conversation that we're going to have. And I just really want to point out that there are a lot of writers of color out there that have been doing this work for so long, right? And as much as Robin DiAngelo is really great at shining a light on racism, especially for non-BIPOC people, in a way that resonates with them, there are also, I guess my critique of her is like, why are we lining her pockets, keeping her on the bestseller list when there are so many other writers of color out there that are not doing as well as she is, who've been speaking about the issue for as long as it's been going on, which is a really long time.
It's hard because I mean it's really amazing contribution, but it's frustrating to watch the dynamics of white centering that have happened
Yes.
through the absolute omniscience of that book. It's a double edge.
So I wanted to ask, does anyone want to share any of their reflections? Maybe you can put it in the chat and Kate will probably read it. Thank you, Kate. So we'll just wait a minute here and see. Don't be shy.
You could start with maybe not ones for yourself. You could start with ones in the community if that's easier. And it's okay if not, because this work, it takes time to process. So
it does. And we can also go on to and just go into the second half. How do you feel about that, Deblekha?
Well, see, someone's putting their hand up.
Oh, yay!
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Kathleen, thanks.
Hi, nice to see you. Thank you for having me today. So one piece that I've been kind of reflecting on is questioning my unconscious bias. So I did an exercise at work of seeing my circle of people I go to when I'm needing advice. And it was a very, very small circle that was exactly like me. And I had to do some major reflection on that. And it took me by surprise how small my circle was. Even though I do all of this work at work, I'm involved in the Women in Leadership Employee Resource Group. I'm part of the Indigenous Peoples Resource Group and the Wellness Group. And my circle was very, very small. So even though I was doing all this outside stuff that has a great impact, within my own little world, I wasn't utilizing all of that work that I do myself at work. And in addition to that, learning that it's not up to me to say I'm an ally. It's people I may be trying to be an ally for, recognizing that I'm an ally. I need to be invited into that. I'm not getting to choose that for myself. So for me, it's been a lot of reflection work and a lot of homework that I need to do, and really just actually shutting up and listening.
Thank you so much for your courage and honesty in that, Kathleen, and also naming just how, like, as we've been saying, I mean, half of the things that we're talking about that we're upset live in the community, absolutely live in ourselves. One of our favorite things usually when starting a conversation like with this is it's about accepting discomfort, but it's also accepting and expecting non-closure, and that's really critical. And then how do we be generous? We'll get to that a little bit down the line with each other in our pace of doing this work, because it is never ending. I think that we've all swum in a soup of capitalist patriarchy, white supremacy, and it's just that work it doesn't just go away. Probably won't in our lifetimes even. So, but I appreciate you saying that. There's another. Did you want to?
No, I'm good. I really, really appreciate what you said about allyship, because, you know, that was my teaching from an Indigenous grandma, is I don't get to call myself an ally. The group that I am working for or trying to promote equity for are the ones that give me that title. I don't get to call myself an ally. It's a name given to me. And it's an honor to be called an ally.
Yeah, and I really, yes, that was a super important part. And I've noticed you in some contexts actually kind of, it's like, I think you should get ribbons. Giving it, she was like, I just want you to know I consider you an ally. And you were very explicitly saying to people, and she was like, so you have permission now, because and it was quite a sweet moment of kind of mutual seeing of each other, and probably mutual motivation and recommitment to the work.
Yes.
It was great. Anybody else have anything?
Is there something in the
There's
chat?
something in the chat. Yeah. Here, do you want to read that?
I can't.
I
see
can't.
it
Okay, I have to
because
move it
I'm
because I can
old.
barely. And look at us. Yes.
Can you?
Okay, here we go.
read it?
Yeah. Okay, I can read it now. I've changed it. So this is from Darlene. For me, this is a moment by moment discussion in my head. Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. When am I authentically engaging, and when might I want others to perceive how I'm engaging? It's honestly a question with no answer. Absolutely. I think for me, the test comes when I have to risk something to confront racism. I have to risk something to confront racism in my circles when I have something to lose. Will I do it? Will I hide behind my privilege? Then I have to live with those decisions. Up to now, I have generally been able to do that. But there have been moments when I recognize that I sometimes will do things so that others will know that I'm in their corner. Wow, thank you for such incredible honesty, Darlene. Yeah, that's I mean, it's true. I mean, and I definitely, for me, sometimes even with, you know, even when we're picking the pictures that are going to be representative on the Ames website, it's like, it's really important to center folks of color in the pictures to represent realities that have been not represented. But it's like finding that fine line between not over-representing, not profile, not including pictures that are over and above actually what's happening on the ground. And it's, I mean, it's not exactly, but it is sort of that moment of constantly monitoring yourself, like we're, you know, trying to have credibility, like, you know, have credibility, but I'm friends with Sharyn, so I feel like, you know, it's going to give me some, well, no, but it is an interesting thing about sort of when it's motivated, is investigating our own motivations, but also trying to be honest with ourselves. Oh yeah. So yeah, Lori talking about, yeah, that I'm too quick to think I understand, as a queer woman, and that the struggles of BIPOC folks are more accessible to her. It's true. I feel the same. I feel the same way. I mean, I'm definitely, when I bring in a little bit, really looking at my own extremism. I'll tell a quick little story where I think, oh yeah, you know, this is my realm. I do this work all the time. And I was quickly doing a post and I wanted to just talking to kids about doing this work. And the post was I really wanted to say, you know, it's really hard to see our blind spots. And I was like, oh, I think that's ableist. And I probably shouldn't use that. And I just watched myself squirm. I watched myself go, well, people are going to know I'm progressive. That I'm not using it in that context. And, you know, I was like, this is who I am. They're not going to, and I squirmed. I resented, you know, even though I knew there was a part of me, it's like, yeah, you can't use that. If it's dawned on you that this is ableist, I mean, this is the most superficial of possible examples, but it is kind of interesting. And that's sort of like this thing, what you said, I guess, back to this thing about white progressives. I think that when we self-identify as progressive, there's that notion that we're already awake, and so our work is done.
And what is progressive anyway? What is a progressive? How do you measure that? How do you label yourself as that?
Yeah,
that's what I'd like to.
That's a bigger question. Thank you for all your amazing notes in the chat, and we'll should we keep? I'm trying to be mindful of time. So,
yes, we should.
And the work will continue.
Yes.
Okay. And apparently I have a Galiano voice. Sorry if I sound like Minnie Mouse.
Okay. So we're going to go on with the second half.
Yeah,
do you want to just
I'm going to
line it up?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as Sharyn said at the beginning, expect a little discomfort. Well, if it's any consolation, we've had our share of moments of discomfort too. And we're going to do a little reenactment for you here.
Yes.
I tidied it up a little to make ourselves look a little better. But no, not really. I just want to see. Yeah, so here we go.
Yes.
So I was just rereading. I'm really awkwardly. Am I in the frame still?
Yes, you are.
So I was just rereading the white supremacy cultural characteristics and the what racial gaslighting sounds like list in preparation for that take-home goodie pack, which you're all going to get. And it kind of dawned on me that I think I might have whitewashed the comments that you made in that Zoom meeting that we had with the university students last month, when that guy basically said, why don't more brown people stand up for themselves? Like, I'm really amazed at how few brown people are actually speaking up. And I guess that means it's more work for us white allies to step up. And when you responded, I don't know. Anyway,
So,
I hope you feel uncomfortable calling me out if I white-splained you and I gaslit you.
So it's interesting for me because when that happened, so this happened, and the next day, Deblekha asked me how I felt about it. And my response to her, or my response to you, was basically that I didn't notice that you had white-splained it because this happens to me a lot, right? And because you are a brown person, I know that you are experiencing your own internalized and externalized racism. And I kind of feel like you always have my back, right? And so you asked me, and then I went away and I do what I normally do at the end of the day. I lay in bed, I go over like things that happened during the day, the things that I need to do the next morning, like most of us do. And that's when I usually think about what happened today. And that's when I'm always questioning myself, oh God, did I say that in the right way? Did I do that in the right way? Like, that's when I'm critiquing myself. And that night I went to bed and I thought, yeah, you kind of did white-splain me a little bit. Because my remark, and can I say what my remark was at this point? So my remark to that student was, so what happened for me in the moment was I got triggered. I wasn't angry, but I was triggered. And we didn't have very long on the call. Actually, it was only supposed to be a 45-minute call. And this was near the end of the call. And I didn't feel like I had time in there to say, whoa, can we just slow down for a minute? I don't know what's going on for me right now. I'm feeling a little bit triggered. I don't know why. And so I just took a breath, and my response to this young man was to basically give him a little insight into why I may remain silent. And what I said to him was, as a darker skinned person who is visibly, right, I'm not as white passing as you are, even though I have a lot of white in my DNA just because of history and slavery and all of this. My comment to him was that as a person who sticks out like a sore thumb, I may not speak up when these things are happening, because it's actually safer for me to remain quiet than it is to speak up. And I just wanted to give him that. So what did you hear me say?
Well, I mean, I guess I it's a bit, maybe I felt like there was stuff in there that needed to be reframed, but I guess I was, and this is again me white splaining or off-white splaining or white hearing, actually, because I agree, I admit that I heard hostility in your voice. And I'm so I'm so sorry that I am talking to a Black woman about feeling, but I guess I thought there was a bit of hostility, and I knew that we haven't a strong enough relationship that we could kind of debrief it. But I guess there was a part of me that what you said was such an important message. And I think it speaks to the heart of how to be a good ally. Because what ended up happening is it was like this person was like, well, I guess I really got to be the white savior now because brown people aren't speaking up for themselves, and not understanding the super complexities of internalized racism, not understanding things around safety, and also just because a brown person doesn't speak up does not mean they've given consent. And I felt like there was so many important messages in what you said that I wanted to make sure, you know, it got restated, not necessarily in a way that would land better. I guess that's part of it, but not necessarily better. No, I scratch that. But like often, if there is a key message, to restate it several ways to make sure it doesn't get missed for multiple points of access. So I mean, that was my good intention, but in a way, I did perpetuate that kind of subtly perpetuate that notion that your words need to be translated.
Yes, and have the hostility, which I didn't feel like there was hostility in my voice, because this is a young 21-year-old man. And for me, youth are the most authentic. Children and youth are so authentic in their being. And they can tell when you're faking it. And they will call you out on it. And I don't ever want to be inauthentic with youth, because I know if we're going to save the planet underneath our feet, youth are the ones that are going to do it. And it makes me sad that we've done this to the world. But the youth today that I see, including my daughter, they're having conversations in the way that we never had conversations when we were that age. You know, they're calling each other in, they're talking about the hard stuff. And for me, I did not want to disappear on him. I wanted to give him some insight into why. And even if there was a little bit of hostility in my voice, so what? Am I not allowed to be hostile when I'm being told that, hey, you know, brown people don't speak up for themselves because they're powerless? And that was it for me. We are not powerless. We don't need to be saved. And when I speak about my experiences as a brown woman, if there's some anger or angst or hostility in my voice, which I still believe there wasn't, that what is wrong with that? What is wrong with talking about oppression with emotion? Because that's what it is. No, right. And if we can have, if you can hear the emotion in my voice, whether I intend it to be there or not, and you can make peace with it, does not that make us grow better as human beings sharing this world together? Does not that bring out more compassion for each other? Does that not get uncomfortable? Because in that moment, I was uncomfortable, and I am going to make mistakes in this because, as you said, we all swim in this pool. We found ways, you as a biracial woman, me as a darker skinned woman, to exist in this, I'm going to say, white dominant culture that has its own internalized bits, right? So for me, when I feel that uncomfortableness in my belly, it's more usually about, do I take this opportunity and put myself out there to get understanding in a way of you being able to put yourself in my shoes and see from my point of view. And so what may be judged as being hostile may actually just be fear and vulnerability.
So, yeah.
And
So
the
much-
reason
so much
why
there,
we're
yeah.
having this conversation now, Deblekha and I, and reliving it, is because these are the difficult conversations that we need to continually have with each other as we live in small communities if we want to create more equitable communities for everyone in there.
Yeah, and I really needed to, I really wanted to know, like, is there ever a place, like, because pandering and centering whiteness, pandering to and centering whiteness is something, because I've spent most of my life in mostly white dominated communities, it's something I'm really good at. Something
too.
I want to unlearn in some
think-
ways, but it's also something that can be strategically a tool to maybe get people in to, but at what cost? If it keeps, so I mean, I really needed to, I just really needed to check in with you, and I appreciate you not, I guess, writing me off as 100% assimilator. I know that obviously my assimilation, and I would really love moving forward for us to figure out, like, when moments like that are going to come up again and we're in a room together, let's figure out, you know, how to do the best job of making transparent what's going on. And even saying, I am tempted right now to get in there and re-say what she just said. And I'm not, because and like, sort of, I'm wondering if there's ways we can kind of blow up that moment in a detail, but we need to have these conversations sort of ahead of time. And I don't want to enable kind of a dynamic where ultimately you're being silenced.
Yes,
Re-explaining you.
Yes, and we were able to talk our way through that and move on. And yeah, we just have to keep talking. We have to keep being uncomfortable. We have to keep reaching out and reaching in, and accept that when it comes to these hard conversations, sometimes I am fucking angry.
And that's all right. That's good. I mean, that's part of, but I do think it is important that we keep bringing that up. Like,
Yes.
Actually, I do think it's important that we put why culturally we have so much difficult time with anger, period. But, and that's part of that tone policing thing too. And it's something that I've experienced a lot in a lot of advocacy work of late is, you know, it's one of these classic ways in which, you know, if people just think, oh, you're angry, it just means the problem is you. And that's also that spiritual bypassing piece where it's like, the problem is you're angry. So we don't have to actually listen to what you said. You've got a problem. So we just get to conveniently, all these really legitimate critiques just get super delegitimized. And I think people consciously see anger, even when there isn't. Yes, it's appropriate and fine if there is anger, but sometimes people even see anger. It's like that quote, you know, equity feels like an attack if you know nothing but privilege. So, you know, I've often been in rooms where I am like even a hyper panderer because I'm like, I barely have to have any heat body, and I am passionate too, before I feel like I'm a little bit like dismissed as too hot. She's not balanced, so she's not engaging in rational discourse. So probably everything that she has to say is rooted in this sort of.
And the sad part
hysteria
about this is every time that I do have these conversations in community, and if there is any heat or any passion, I come from a culture that's loud. We talk on top of each other. We get excited, we're big, we're flamboyant, the third world country, but there is a joy. There is a joy for life. There is a caretaking of people who are in my community, whether they are from that place or not. And so when I speak about these things and I get my passion on, sometimes, I am a little loud. I am a little, boisterous and very passionate, because this stuff means so much to me. And for me, racism and feminism is so tied to the way that we treat our planet, that we are actively killing ourselves off of, which makes absolutely no sense to me, that we need to be able to accept that when people are talking about these things, especially in a small rural community, every time that someone who looks like me has this conversation, we are actually putting ourselves at risk at being ostracized from the community.
Yeah, and that I think really comes back. We're going to have a writing prompt in a sec, but that really comes back for me about really how all of the isms show up a lot in these sort of progressive communities. Is it's not as much overt racism, but it shows up in the invisible authors of the rules of engagement. There's gatekeepers. We don't see who they are. We know who they are, but they never, it's like they're the one, like, this is what it means to be a team player. This is what it means to engage. And this is what civil discourse looks like.
Yes.
And so
who
we're already out of, well, I mean, it means like that we don't even have a place at the table, because if so that to me is, I feel like notions of excellence and notions of what a good leader looks like and a team player and what civic discourse looks like, those are those concepts that are treated as neutral, but that hold so much power in how decisions get made and how people get heard. They need to
gets heard,
and who gets heard, and so they need to be interrogated. So yeah, so it's like, before we have a conversation, let's talk about, what the texture of the conversation and what's so I'm not quite sure how to initiate doing that, but no, we know we're going to go next into,
okay.
Oh yeah, this is what I was going to say. I'm going to end with this.
Yes, please.
Okay, well, thanks for calling me out. I know it's not your job, but please feel free to call me out when I need to have my privilege check, and share any ideas you might have about how I can be a better ally, and in those difficult conversations. Oh, and let me know if it's all becoming too much of an emotional burden. Oh, I guess that's a lot to ask of you. Oh, okay. Maybe you should just send me a bill.
Yes, I will. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have another writing prompt, and we are going to go to some Q&As, if everyone's all right with that. So do you want to read these, Deblekha?
Yeah, or do you want to you can do the first one and I'll do the next.
Sure, I could do that.
These are, and we're going back, it was fun. We're going back to good old bell hooks.
Yes, bell hooks, Canadian Black feminist writer, brilliant writer. So to build inclusive and equitable community requires vigilant awareness of the work we must continually do to undermine all the socialization that leads us to behave in ways that perpetuate domination. What about you?
Okay, and we kind of decided, I know it's a little bit dense, but we kind of wanted these quotes to go together because of kind of, we build this as, how do we as a community get better at having courageous conversations with each other. So this is from a 1998 interview with Maya Angelou and Bell Hooks. She says, for me, forgiveness and compassion are always linked. How did it go away? Oh, how do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? And to me, that is a huge, that's the crux of it. So it's a lot, they're dense comments, quotes, but maybe, and they're in the party pack they're in the take home
Yes.
pack that you'll get, so you can look at them, but maybe take a moment to let them land. And do a little bit of journaling about how dominant culture shows up for you. You can just go off to the races in whatever that is. But you can think, but it's important if you can to think about it from multiple perspectives. Things you've witnessed, things you've experienced, things you've thought, but maybe not spoken out loud, and things you've perpetuated. Because all of us, no matter how marginal, have perpetuated domination. And then you'll see other questions down there, but they're really basically, I know we're running out of time, so we can't get to all of them, but really about how do we, the crux of the question for us has been like, what does transformative collective accountability look and feel like? How can we hold conversations that leave room for anger, and vigilant awareness, but also maintain compassion for self and others? So we're gonna let you sort of chew on some of those things for a bit, and we'll come back in
20 after 4.
what is it now?
It's just
No, wow, no, I think we should be a little more. We have to give people 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes. Come back in 5 minutes. Hello again.
So we're back. And we were just chatting about the way that the last part went. And I think there's a missing piece here, so Deblekha and I have been friends for a long time, and that's not even the point, right? Like, just because I say something in a certain way, it doesn't mean that you can't challenge me, right? I'm not the authority, I'm not the monolith, and I don't want you to always defer to me just because I'm Black, right? Like, I want you to challenge me because I also want to grow as a human, and I want to be challenged on when I too am wrong. And the emotional piece for me is so connected to feminism, right? Of just like women who are emotional, especially women, especially darker skinned women, are to be silenced because we are insane, right? And that viewpoint of women has been taken for centuries, and it's time to stop. It's time to stop that.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So,
So yeah.
into
Oh,
the
sorry, I'm coming
frame.
into the frame. I keep sneaking out.
So what we're going to do now, we are going to take some Q&As from you guys. Does anyone have any questions for
Or
us?
anything you want to share?
Or anything you want to share? Yes.
I've got a question, I think, in the chat. I'm just going to ask Karina if she'd like to unmute herself.
I'm here.
Hi, Karina.
Hello.
Perfect.
I don't know why she asked me to unmute.
Oh, did you have your hand up?
No, I just sent in a comment and I wrote it in.
Can you read it?
Sure, I can read it. To the question, how can transformative accountability be achieved in our community? Would be for community organizations to adhere to anti-racism work on a regular basis. I would think every 3 months, do a quarterly thing, just like you do your quarter evaluations. Being part of a community organization makes you a community leader and an ideal space to start modeling accountability, especially in our community when we don't have that physical central hub that some communities have. We're very spread out. I think on Galiano, there's so many different community organizations that it would create an epidemic of consciousness if that work was being done on a regular basis.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for
Thank you
flaying
for the
that.
time.
That was amazing. And also, and I think you also point out that thing about the lack of a public space sometimes, and the fact that we're spread out over so many islands. And you reminded me that Sharyn had something that I would like to add. Lori is going to put the website for the BIPOC Community Collective that Sharyn is part of. And one of the things that maybe could happen if people feel called to is if people in doing this work feel like they want to make a commitment, it might be nice if we can get publicly get people to make commitments and then report back on how they're doing on something, so that we start to bring in measuring, like and then measuring becomes, it's like, it doesn't have to be like I'm feeling judged. It becomes a kind of a standard thing we do. It's just what you do to make sure you keep on moving, and figuring out ways to do that.
And also as a hub to share resources and ideas of how we can continue to do this work. So it is the BIPOC Community Collective, BIPOCCC.ca. And send in your briefings. Thank you. Thank you. Send in your writings, send in your ideas, send in how you're challenging yourself today, because and we don't have to publish your name, but we would like to put it out there to the community of like, hey, this person is doing this, or this person came up with this idea. What do you think of this? Because we are missing the hub. And I think
it could really, really help to build critical mass of momentum. So yeah, thank you for all.
Thank you so much, Karina.
We have a comment in the chat from Joanne Bailey.
Hi, Joanne.
In an exchange with now disgraced American TV host Charlie Rose, the late Toni Morrison posed a question that I believe is useful for white people to ponder. In the absence of whiteness, are you any good? Are you smart? Are you the best that you can be? At this hour, many so-called racial minorities see that you are, in the absence of the cloak of whiteness, really not that interesting. Interesting if other white people have a response.
Unmute us.
Okay.
That is powerful. Thank you so much, Joanne. And maybe all of us need to be asked, especially, you know, when you're in a situation of power, like maybe even doing a power audit. Where am I right now? How much power do I hold in this situation? And am I a good person in this situation?
Can I just unmute here for a minute?
Yes.
Because I just want to say that I saw Toni Morrison say that, and I just thought, oh my God, that is so good. And of course, Charlie Rose was just like gobsmacked, you know. I'm going to unmute here.
Okay, thanks, Joanne.
Thank you, Joanne.
I also have a question from Darlene Gage. I'd love to hear about resources that others use to help organizations reflect and take actions on racism and other forms of oppression within the organization.
I'm happy to, if you send an email, I'm happy. We've been doing a little bit of work. I mean, and we've got a framework for looking about moving from non-racist and moving along the continuum to more anti-racist. And maybe we can start to, we've got a lot of curriculum stuff being gathered, but also just really juicy readings for educators and organizations to sort of help create frameworks for at doing that work. And then there's also individual ones. So you can look at like the continuum of moving along in your own anti-racist practice as an individual, and then how that intersects kind of at an organizational level. So happy to share that. Oh, thanks, Lori.
We also have another comment from Janice Browning. Karina, great suggestion. Was thinking in response to the question that dominant assumptions make an ass of you. They assume rather than approaching from a position of humility and questioning. Assumptions are often made from a position of privilege.
Thank you, Janice.
Yeah, thanks, Janice. Anyway.
Yeah,
who's done so much. I mean, you know, we're all big fans. Has done so much of the GID groundwork that Ames uses in terms of tools and in different getting young people to critically reflect on their own privilege. Janice is the one who introduced us to the power flower. So anyway, sorry.
And continues
Thank you.
to
And
do
continues
the work
to
with youth. And
with young youth. That's the thing, is it's working with young people is pretty important. So we're open to, what's that? Oh, I can't hear you. Lori has a question. Oh.
I'm muted, sorry.
Lori. Oh, yeah. Lori has a question, okay.
Yeah, so I don't wanna, I mean, we could talk about this for 17 years, but I wonder if you or Sharyn could talk about, it never feels like enough time. If you could talk about the role of the school system, those of us that work inside of that institution, which I feel like is, can be a tide that lifts all boats, or can be a boot on your neck, depending on who the kid is. So I'm wondering if you guys could comment on what the work is there. I mean, that's a big one.
That's a big one. I think we need a whole nother, I mean, but I do think that certainly we're both on a committee, and it's great that the committee's happening, but it's like, you know, even as someone who does this work, I'm like, do we start interpersonally? Because if we don't have those conversations around personal location, we just keep getting, you know, people want to do action, but they haven't unpacked those big assumptions. And so the action is itself, the action is itself sometimes limited. And you know, I will say for me, speaking just as a, I think one thing is trying to not step on teachers' toes around teacher autonomy, but also say like, wow, this is me kind of going a bit out of on a limb here, but I do feel like I want to support teachers with professional development in stepping into their capacity to do these conversations really, really well. Like there, you know, there's so much low-hanging fruit that we actually need to break open together. And I would like teachers to feel supported in stepping into those conversations, because they really are not happening at the level that they should be happening. And it is a multi-pronged, multi-system. It's about resources, it's about commitment, it's about all of the players doing their work. And in my experience, there's a lot of, you know, gestures, but a lot, the work is messy and it takes time, and it's very hard to budget.
Because the education system is such a big moving machine. And I am personally sitting on a committee with the BC Alliance and with the BC Black Historical Society, working with the Minister of Education to look at curriculum, because I see that as one of the biggest problems. I didn't know I was Black until I came to Canada. And not only did I know I was Black when I got here, all of a sudden I disappeared. So I was pushed to the forefront physically in like my appearance of living in small town Canada, but at the same time, I'm not in the curriculum anywhere unless we're talking about the Underground Railroad, right? And slavery did exist here, and there were slaves escaping from Canada to New York to escape the brutality that they faced. Lots of Blacks and Indigenous folks were enslaved by the British, and the average lifespan for a slave in Canada was about 22 years. So that just talks to the amount of brutality that people were experiencing here in Canada. But how many people know that? How many prime ministers even know that? How many teachers know that? And so why are we learning curriculum about some dead white guy in England who wrote some books? You know, why is it the only book that, and I worked at the school system for 18 years. The only books that I saw kids learning in the middle school that had any kind of BIPOC children were a book about a boy in Afghanistan who worked in a carpet thing, who was actually killed afterwards, and To Kill a Mockingbird, or the story of Malala, you know, getting shot in the head. It's like, are there no other stories other than this? Like, who invented Pythagoras' theorem? It wasn't some white guy. He traveled to Africa to learn these theories. And so we've got to stop framing the world and what youth are learning in school from this very narrow white European lens, because we've always been a global community, even before the internet. So it's time to bring more truth and get rid of the lies out of the education system.
Thank you both.
Yes, thanks. And I'm just gonna have one other plug is I know that critical thinking is supposed to be a core competency. I mean, it's right there, but man, I don't see a lot of, I think somehow we need like a critical thinking pep rally and actually get everybody to really level up their skills and like get over yourself and don't be threatened. And if kids are questioning in your class, go like, that's awesome. I'm winning the game. My kids are engaged enough to question me and my curriculum. And I think that's how we're going to engage kids is encourage them to be critical. So, yeah.
Give me a C. Give me an R.
Oh, I went to A. See, I'm a bad speller. Okay. Well, should we, I'm going to look to you. Do you think that we should just move to the closing, or are there other, I will say a little bit about the takeaway thing. It's a work in progress, but I just thought, I was just pulling a few things that I thought might speak to people in rural contexts. And one of the things about white supremacy characteristics is probably really helpful for organizations.
I
But
think
yeah,
that's it
do you
for
think
us.
that yeah, okay, so we're gonna do the waterfall.
Yes, let's do the
So
waterfall.
if there's no more burning questions, we are gonna, and thank you so much. This
Thank you
was
all.
very, I'm not gonna lie, this was really stressful. It brought up a lot of stuff for us, but it was also
Which is a point,
was
because
great.
if we get to unpack
exactly.
it,
So we got to do it. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
It was great. We got to do it all. We got to do the work as we were trying to do
do
the
the
work,
work.
preparing for this. So
Because
yes,
we have
thank
our
you
own work to do, right?
for
We all do.
that amazing opportunity. One of the things I thought we'd do is just a little bit of a closing thing, although Kate is going to have some exit messages for us. But just before we do that, if someone told me how to do this thing and I'm not sure it's going to work, but we'll try. I don't think there's time for us all. I don't know how many people are on the call now still. We're at 52. Okay, 52. But normally I would love it if we could all just say one thing that you kind of got out of the process, but that's not probably possible. But if we get into the chat, if everybody can, a word, one sentence, a phrase, something that you're walking away with feeling, if we can just get it in the chat, but don't hit send yet, just get it typed, ready to go. And then we'll do a countdown, and then we'll all press send together, and it's called waterfall. So we'll feel the love, and then or feel the bewilderment and whatever we're feeling,
or the angst, or the triggers.
and then the library will download it, and I guess that's going to be part of it. Okay, so as everybody, what are we gonna? Okay, let's give us we'll count down to 10.
4, 3, 2, 1. Hit send. Oh, beautiful. That's awesome.
Mine totally was like typoed, but anyway, that's okay. Okay, thank you, Galiano Library, for providing us with this opportunity. So really appreciate it.
And thank you all for taking the time out on your Sunday afternoon to just participate and be here and just listen to the difficult conversations. Like, this is how we're going to get through this together, is by having the difficult conversations and learning how to listen to each other.
Cool. So yeah, back to you, Kate, for.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So on behalf of the Galiano Library and from me personally, I want to thank you again so much for joining us and for doing the work and for inspiring us to remember that we need to keep doing the work. We are really grateful to you for sharing your time and your insight, your experience, and your extraordinary insight gathered from years and years of experience and hard work and smart thinking. So thank you both so much on behalf of the library and me. I'm just going to share my screen again. 1 second. As mentioned, Deb and Sharyn have kindly put together, let's see if the slideshow works this time. Sorry. Deb and Sharyn have kindly put together a takeaway sheet of definitions and reflections related to today's talk. I got a sneak preview of it, and it's absolutely brilliant. Lori has dropped it into the chat, and you can download the document from there. If that seems a little too complicated, you're also welcome to write to us at galianolibrary@gmail.com, and we would be pleased to send it to you as a PDF, not a hard copy. In other business, the Galiano Library is currently open on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays for socially distant in-person visits from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And yay, starting April 1st, we will also be open on Thursdays from 11 a.m. to 2 o'clock p.m. And we'll be able to accommodate 5 patrons at a time instead of 3. The time limit remains 15 minutes. While you are there, We highly recommend you check out our exciting International Women's Day book displays, including adult, juvenile, and early reader titles related to today's talk. We will also, in the next couple of days, distribute on social media a list of recommended readings that Deb and Sharyn have suggested, all of which are available as ebooks through the Galiano Library website, and a couple of which are also available in hard copy in the display, although they're probably already out by now. Lori, did you want to say something about next month's talk?
I would love to. Very quickly, as folks kind of run away to finish their weekend, we are so excited to focus our speaker series this year on the voices of locals who may have been made not local beyond their choice. So April 11th, again, Sunday at 3, we're easy to remember. We are going to be welcoming the descendants of Mary O'Hara, who was a Galiano-born girl. The north end of Galiano was once pretty much Japanese settler families and indigenous families. And that's a piece of Galiano history that we're so excited to share with you, with the direct descendants of the O'Hara family, who will be with us talking about Canada's role in Japanese internment and the incredible story of Mary O'Hara's life on Galiano and her eventual return here at 82 for her high school graduation. So we hope you join us then. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Also, as a sneak preview of our final event in the speaker series, which will be Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock on May the 16th, and it will feature a conversation between Rosemary Georgeson and Jessica Hallenbeck on their experience of collaborating to find Rosemary's ancestors and much more. We will have information about that upcoming talk in the active page. Also, if you are not on the already on the library's email list, please write to us to make sure that you don't miss out. You will get, I promise, not hundreds of emails, but you'll get the important information about talks like this one. Really, really just like, 20. So thank you very much. Our talk will be archived today on the Galiano Library YouTube page. And we encourage you to share it with your friends and family, and also to check out the other talks that are archived on that page, including last month's talk by Evelyn White, Who Do You Think You Are? Celebrating Black Histories in the Southern Gulf Islands. So thank you again. As Lori said, thank you for sharing your Sunday afternoon with us, especially given the problems that many people have had with internet, given BC Hydro's busyness today. So thank you very, very much. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event. And thank you again, especially to Deblekha and Sharyn. Good night.